I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Rick Guzzo, who will speak to us about tenure, age, and performance, what employers need to know. Rick Guzzo is a partner and co-founder of Mercer's Workforce Sciences Institute, a research and innovation center. He delivers data-driven advisory work on workforce issues such as performance and productivity, workforce strategy and planning, workplace equity. His research informs Mercer's programs for employers to help them optimize their workforce performance, capturing the value of age and experience in the changing world of work. Rick has published extensively and has testified before the United States Congress on workforce issues, and he's advised the World Economic Forum on human capital issues. Rick will be sharing some of his findings from his recent meta-analysis on age, experience, and business performance. Please join me in welcoming Rick Guzzo.
Well, thank you for the great advertisement, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and present some findings that we think are pretty unique, a database or a set of databases that really doesn't exist anywhere else, and that were not created with the intent of asking questions about age, but gave us the opportunity to really investigate how age and work and performance come together, right, in today's organizations. So the background that you heard is spot on. Before Mercer, I came to Mercer as a college professor for many years. Organizational psychology was my background. Thought I'd stay with Mercer for that 1 year that I was on sabbatical, but it got so interesting I hopped over and never left. So we're kind of a researchy group, and you'll see that come through. So let me give you some context. We at Mercer do an annual survey. We call it Global Talent Trends, and it is global, right? So we've got literally, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 employees around the world responding, as well as employers responding to separate questions. And what you see here on the left are questions with responses, and this is global intentionally, right? But I'll tell you that the U.S. numbers, and I would guess Colorado's numbers, look like what you see here. They don't deviate all that much U.S. From global. So the first question is, are you going to retire? Are you ever going to stop working? And the answer is no by 12% of the respondents, right? And the next question is, well, do you think you're going to work for a while? Yeah, I think I'm going to work for 5 years or maybe up to 5 years. 20% people say. So now we're up to a third of the working population, right, saying they're going to work beyond retirement age. Next question is, well, would it be 6 or more years? Yep, a whole bunch more. So with successively, if you will, longer horizons or totally open horizons, right? I intend to keep working. One of the questions, who knows, could be forever, right? An indeterminate horizon. You see that in the end, 84% of current employees intend to be working beyond retirement age, right? That's an enormous number, we think. And then on the right, our responses to, well, why would you do that, right? And here, a respondent could check more than one answer, right? And so you see, well, stay sharp, right? Have something to do, right? Financial reasons feature in there for many of the respondents, medical issues or being part of a community, down below. So any individual could have multiple reasons, right, to drive that intention to work beyond the age or what they would consider, quote, retirement age. And retirement age globally differs, right? Countries have different years or age eligibility rules for when they could collect a government pension, for example, and they also differ. What retirement age means differs by organization. Some organizations it's earlier than others. We let the respondent define retirement age. We're not saying it's age 62 or 65. It's what it means to them in their circumstances. Okay, so we got a lot of people who are intending to keep at it, right, beyond what would be retirement age in their, in their circumstances. So what do the individuals have that in common? They got a lot of experience, right? They've been at it for a while, and they have a tremendous amount of experience. And okay. And I'm going to amplify on the question about is it good for employers later. But let me just talk about how we interpret experience conceptually in terms of work and potential sources of value of experience for employers. And if there are any individuals here who are economists by training or background, you may have heard these terms of general human capital and firm-specific human capital. So general human capital is the skills, the capabilities, the knowledge, the learning, the things I acquire, right, through experience and carry with me wherever I'm working. And they're also, it also represents innate or native attributes that I have, intelligence or sociability that might be of value to, in certain workplaces, et cetera. Importantly, general human capital is transportable. It's something I can take from employer to employer as an individual. Firm-specific human capital relates to the value of having worked in an organization, right, in a place over time. And as a part of that firm-specific experience, you learn a lot, right, that is unique to that organization. Its proprietary processes, its customers, its suppliers, it's how it does things, its culture, its networks of associations, right, who you connect with and who you have opportunities to connect with. That is firm-specific human capital. That, too, can have value to the employer, right? So you got two sources, general and firm-specific. So when I joined Mercer, right, I brought a certain amount of general human capital, and I think over the many years I've been there, I've developed developed firm-specific human capital, right? Now, how do you measure those things? Typically, general human capital is proxied by age, right? The total cumulative experience of work, and firm-specific would be proxied by the number of years in a company, right? So tenure in a current employer, in my case Mercer, is my measure of firm-specific. Those are the two measures we're going to report on, right? I'm going to report on in this talk. Fair enough? Yep. So what do we know about age and work performance? Well, we know a lot. But I'm going to tell you what we've seen in our own analyses working with our client organizations. And so just a little backdrop here. I'm part of what we call the Workforce Sciences Institute at Mercer. What we do is very data-driven analytic work in support of our consulting services. And we will tend to download the entire record of an organization's employees, typically over a period of years, and we tend to do statistical modeling to say what attributes of the individual or of the situations they're in or the management practices they're exposed to are driving certain outcomes for them and for their organization. Those outcomes might be who gets ahead, right? Who gets promoted. They might be who emerges into leadership roles. They might be who stays, right? And sometimes we actually connect attributes of individuals in the workplaces to business performance, to outcomes. And I'll say more about that a little bit later on. So we have a lot of data, right? And when we look back at, we chose 10 companies. We've got way more than that we could have looked at. We said, what do we see with regard to the most common measure of individual performance in the workplace, an annual performance rating? Anyone here ever had one, right? Yeah, okay. Maybe year after year. And when we look back at across 10 large organizations with thousands and thousands of annual performance ratings in them, what we see is a near universal truth. And that near universal truth is that older employees are substantially less likely to be rated highly, to get the highest rating in a rating system. On average, they're 14% less likely than younger peers to be highly evaluated. Sometimes it's twice that number in some organizations, okay? And this is after accounting for other factors that can legitimately influence a performance rating, like the scope of responsibilities that you have or the nature of the work you do, et cetera, right? So something's going on here that is connected to age. And one question is it really an objective reality that these performance ratings are reflecting? Older workers simply aren't performing at the levels of others? Or is it, say, subjective age-related bias, ageism at play, for example? There was a recent analysis of different kind of isms in the workplace. Ageism, sexism, racism. Ageism, among those, ageism was the second most powerful in terms of influencing people's biases and opinions towards others, right? Racism was one. I thought that was an interesting finding. So anyhow, we're not going to answer the question about is it ageism in the performance ratings. I have a hunch that there's some element of that, right? But what we are going to do is contrast the subjective approach to assessing age and performance with a more objective approach, which involves actually connecting up the age of employees, tenure of employees, to business results. Okay, so let me amplify a little bit about the nature of the work. So imagine, I'll just give you an example. We've worked, some of the results you'll see come from work we've done with hospital systems, where we look at units in a hospital. The hospital unit might be a post-surgical care unit, right? And there's a defined set of people who are attached to that unit, right? They've got steady flows of patients coming in and going out. And we will follow the performance of that unit over typically years, right? 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe on a monthly basis. And again, we've got a lot of data about the nature of the employees, the nurses, therapists, physicians, whatever, who are providing the care, right, on that ward or in that clinic. And what we're doing here in our work is understanding or connecting up and analyzing the connection between individual attributes, workplace attributes, and performance. The logic is to be as strong as we can be to make causal assertions. So we want to know, are attributes today of the workers, right, the employees, affecting the performance in the next period? So today affecting next month. We want to know that is it, forecasting, predicting what happens next, and we want to control for lots of other things. Hospitals differ a lot in how complex their cases are. That's measurable. We want to control for that because performance with really complex cases can look lower than performance with, if you will, simpler, right, cases. So that's an example of things that we want to statistically control for. So without going into a big lecture on methodology, et cetera, I just want to give you a sense of, we've got a lot of data, right, a lot of observations, and we're really trying to emphasize what are the causal factors influencing outcomes. We call that business impact modeling, right? That's our term for it. And it's a process we bring to our clients. Okay, so the results and the findings I'm going to talk about today are from business impact modeling case studies, right, which we would call research projects. Each one is a standalone research project that is in the service of providing some inputs and guidance to an organization doing real work, right? So on the right, you'll see the industries represented in our sample of studies included in this particular analysis. Transportation, food, that includes restaurants or food service. Retail organizations, we got a mining company in there, so on. So a good sampling. We're not going to say we've got all the industries by any means well represented here, but quite a bit. And the numbers on the right, if you can see them, are person years, which is to say, in any one of those projects, right, any one of those research projects, how many people times how many years were in there. And those are the numbers, right? So it's a lot of people over a lot of years. And in fact, it's 1.25 million employee years of on-the-job performance. I can't find any other database that captures 1.25 million years of people at work, right, which provides us the basis for assessing, in the end, what's the impact of age and experience on business results. So we think that's a pretty cool data set to work from, right? And the performance measures that we have tracked are of three types: financial, customer, and operational. So for example, in the hospital unit that I described, a financial measure might be profit, right? It's literally a measure of the profitability of that entity within the larger hospital. A customer rating might be, I think they're called HCAP ratings. They're ratings of patient satisfaction with their experience in the hospital. That would be an example of customer ratings, or hospitals track this. It's important to their reimbursements, et cetera. And then operational might be post-operative infections, right? Serious issue. It reflects the care and whether or not the hospital unit has conformed to best practices regarding managing infections, et cetera. So those are examples of three different categories, and any one unit could be measured by all three in our analyses, right? If it's a retail banking, financial is profits or assets under management. Customer measures might be customer retention rates or customer referral rates, or operational might be errors, right? When it doesn't add up at the end of the day, for example. So the measures we use are specific to the businesses and the units that people are working in, right? Okay. All right, let's get into some results here. Catherine used the word meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is a particular analytic technique for summarizing into a single whole, if you will, the results of many different separate studies. It's very common in medical research. It's extremely common in medical research, but it's common across lots of discipline areas, right? What we did was a meta-analysis of our own set of studies, right? These projects that we have accumulated over time to address questions like, does age impact performance? So of the three measures, I'm going to focus on financial performance, right? Obviously of importance to businesses. And what we're going to say is that you can see the headline there. Hey, there's no impact, right? But let me explain what you're looking at on the right. Each of those rows represents one study of the impact of age on financial performance, right, that I just described. So, for example, a hospital or a retail bank, right, or a distribution business or whatever it might be, that has measures of financial performance where we've done the modeling where we can test whether or not age of employees impacts performance in terms of the financial success of their work unit. So there are like 36 rows there. The dots represent the average impact of age on performance. If the dot is to the left of that vertical line, it means it's negative, right? It's hurting. If the dot is to the right, it means it's positive. It's helping performance. And those whiskers, right, those bars that go laterally, represent the variability over time in terms of age's impact on performance in that organization, in that study. It's not always the same month after month. It can vary, right? It can vary partly because of who else is in the work unit and the nature of the work changes month to month, et cetera. So variability, so you see the mean, right, the average is the dot, and the variability are the bands. So the big dot at the bottom sits on the vertical line, right? The big dot on the bottom says, you know what? There is on average, no impact of age on performance across all of these studies. And if you look, top to bottom, we've arrayed them from most negative to most positive, right, in terms of the means. So sometimes age works in favor, sometimes not, but on average, it's just not there. So we think that's kind of good news, right? First of all, it's totally discordant with what you see in the performance review data that we had, right, where age is punished, frankly. Here it's at least saying it shouldn't be punished, it's neutral, right? Okay, and remember, age represents for us a form of, cumulative experience at work, right? The general total work experience that employees bring in the particular situation that they're in right now. All right, how about tenure? Remember, tenure is sort of a subset of total experience. It's the particular experience that I as an employee have in my current organization, with my current employer, right? And we're looking at the average tenure of employees in a work unit. In that hospital, it's the average tenure of the nurses and the therapists, et cetera. In the retail bank, the average tenure of people in a branch, say. Once again, every row is a particular study of the impact of tenure on performance. You can see how they are arrayed. What do you see? You see a real surplus of positive effects right on the lower half, right to the right of that zero line. And in fact, the big dot is to the right of the zero line. And that is saying that, indeed, tenure is an asset to employers, right? That the greater the tenure of employees, the greater the financial performance in their business. We think that's pretty cool to know, right? Right. The little numbers on the far right, by the way, that you can't possibly see, they're partial correlations, and they represent the range around it. And if you want to have a discussion about why partial correlations, I'll have it with you later. But these are clips from a journal article, and that's the graphic, right, that was there. So, significant positive impact of average employee tenure on performance, no such impact of age on performance. Fair enough? Yeah? Okay. Some additional findings. So age and tenure are really correlated, right? So for every additional year that I work at my company, not only am I gaining 1 year of tenure, I'm gaining 1 year of age. And so these things go hand in hand. But overall, I have more age than I have tenure, right? So I can distinguish those two. But I just want to make clear that don't confuse the two, right? They're separate issues. And I think sometimes we think about age without thinking about tenure. That's the point here, right? Is we don't think about, age brings experience, but a lot of that experience is here and now in this place, right? And what's the potential value of that? And it's tenure that has the business value. But the correlation is that older employees tend to have more tenure, right? We know lots of patterns around people are more likely to stay with their current employer. The older they get, they build tenure, et cetera. So there is a correlation that just is natural between age and tenure. The value created by older tenured employees exceeds their higher costs. Older employees tend to cost more. They tend to command higher salaries. They tend to have greater benefit, like medical expense costs to the employer, right? They are costlier. In our research, right, when we talk about financial measures, we're almost always talking about financial measures like profit, which reflect the financial contributions above and beyond the costs of the employment of those individuals. So the contributions are exceeding the costs, right? And we control for the compensation levels of individuals. So that's another thing around older workers. They're seen as expensive, but that's only half the equation, right? You can be expensive, but if you return more than your cost, you're good, right? So third point, what's true for employees is true for their leaders, which is to say that the greater the tenure of the supervisors and managers of the units that we analyzed, the greater the financial performance of those units, okay? Multi-generational workforces are not a problem. One of the things we were able to look at was the range of ages in a given work unit, right? To understand, are they rather, similar in terms of youngish or oldish, or are they dispersed broadly and lots of variability in the age? And we tested that, and we found that there's no impact of the variability or the distribution of age in a work unit on the outcomes of interest here. So we didn't see any gain either, right? It wasn't that multi-generation workforces was a positive. It's just a neutral from our data set, okay? And then we also looked at, is there potentially a tipping point maybe where age and tenure, either one stops being positive or changes in their impact. And we couldn't find any such effect, right? There's no threshold value where age became a liability. The people in our research typically maxed out at around 72, 73, 74 years old, right? We had a couple of 80-some-year-olds in some of the samples. But so we're not sampling 90-year-olds, okay? But within the range, right, we're saying that there's no discernible threshold value where age becomes a liability. There might be, but we think it's well above 70 if it's out there, right? Okay. So what would I offer that employers need to know, right, based on this evidence? Well, I'm going to just offer 3 points. You may have others, and I'd love to hear them. One is that experience matters. In particular, employer-specific experience matters, right? Tenure. And tenure grows, right? The longer you stay with your current employer, and it's good for business. And it's the fact, as we said, that older employees tend to be the ones with greater tenure, right? So age is valuable for the tenure it brings in many cases, right? And that, I think, needs to be recognized, that it's, again, it goes back to that distinction between age as age and age as a marker of types of experience, and the value of certain types of experience, in effect, kind of carried or correlated with age. A second set of practical points would be that, if you will, flexible practices that keep, quote, retirement age, high tenure people in your organization can be really valuable for the business, right? Remember, 84%, according to our survey, want to work or intend to work beyond what they would consider normal retirement age. Well, now there's a business case, not just for them, for their reasons, right? For the many reasons they have to work beyond that retirement age. Now there's a business case for employers to say, let's make it happen. And one of the great ways of making it happen is to be very flexible around the employment practices, the terms of employment for the retirement age employees. Because if you remember back to that first slide I showed, right? A lot of people want to work, but under different circumstances, maybe fewer hours, right? A little more flexibility, et cetera. So accommodate it, right? Enable it, let it happen. Flexible work practices, right? Part-time status or simply reduced hours. There are phased retirement programs that enable people to kind of transition, right? With all the good things around stepping down the work, which meets the employees' needs, but also providing for, transfer of knowledge and preparing those who are behind them, right, to step up and do the work. In fact, we were talking about this last night. The notion of phased retirement programs is sort of morphing in our world into flexible retirement programs. Phased retirement is sort of a legacy term from employers that had pension programs, right, that had a defined date of eligibility, and you could manage around it. But, what is it, 16% of people in the U.S., or maybe 18% are working with a pension program? Most people don't have that. So kind of as a consequence, the language has changed from a, quote, phased retirement program to flexible retirement programs. And frankly, there aren't best practices in this, because from our vantage point, the practices are all over the place in terms of rules of operation, eligibility, et cetera, et cetera. There's no one best way to do it. Really, the design of a set of flexible practices needs to fit the circumstances, the organization as well. The last point I'll offer here is that traditional forms of employment have business value. The traditional employer-employee relationship, right? Where I am an employee, I stay with an organization, I might spend many years there, I build tenure. That's actually advantaging the business organization, the enterprise, right? According to our data. That's a good thing. There's a lot of buzz, right, and talk around gig economy and platform work and the spot hire and let them go. Well, those things are real, but they don't build tenure, right? They don't provide the opportunity for individuals to acquire firm-specific knowledge and or to make contributions, say, that go above and beyond the particular activity that they're asked to do, right? Like drive me from point A to point B if I call use my Lyft app or something like that. This notion of gig work and contract work, I'm not saying it's bad. Obviously, there's a place for it, but I'm saying that it is leading to, in my mind, a failure to recognize the value inherent in tenure and in traditional employment relationships. There's a reason why organizations exist, right? and part of it is expressed through the impact of tenure on business results. So I'll conclude there by saying we're very excited about the database because it is unique, because it's powerful. Our mission is to get the word out. You can actually find this paper. I think we're making available the document, right? That's kind of a long link to copy down, but anyhow, it's out there. It's available for free to see the original piece. And I want to thank my authors, Haig and Nick, who together with me put a lot of effort into this. But we think it's got great potential. The journal, by the way, is called Work, Aging, and Retirement. It's kind of a newish journal, but it's an academic research-based journal, and you might be interested in looking up that journal for other topics that are relevant to the AIMS mission. Yeah. So thank you. You want to take questions?
Yes.
Yeah. We have some time for questions or reactions to any of the points I made or additions that people would like to make. Yeah.
We have mics for you.
Cool.
I'm Dorothy Simon from AARP, and I'm surprised to see the result that you reported that the multi-generational workforce is a neutral. We've seen a lot of evidence that it's a positive. And so can you say more about kind of why you think that landed that way?
Yeah, I think, remember, it's neutral for the measures that we capture, right? So we're looking at financial, customer and operational measures. I think that there are multi-generational workforces could have benefit in measures that we're not capturing in this research. So, for example, one of the things we know is that older workers tend to be better citizens than younger workers, right? In terms of kind of citizens going above and beyond, certain ways, sharing knowledge, doing things that are, for the good of the enterprise. And I think that happens in part because younger people in the presence of older workers can cue it, right? Some coaching, right? Some information exchange. So I'm saying that with regard to our set of measures, but I think there's opportunity to have positive, but I also think there's opportunity to have negative impacts, right? So you can have the conflicts, the miscommunications, the ageism pop up in a multi-generational workforce, but maybe some of those can be better managed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, your first slide about how many older adults are planning on working past
Yep.
65 or whatever.
Right.
Do you have any idea what the percentages are or how that is as far as men and women?
Oh, good question. So, oops, I just went past it, yeah. I don't think I have the breakout of those responses, but I do know we've looked at things like gender gap in retirement, funding. It's huge, right? And so I would bet that women have more of the economic reasons at play to work beyond, but because there are multiple reasons driving people to work beyond retirement age, the numbers of men and women or the ratios might not differ, but the reasons might differ. Yeah, that's my guess. Yep.
Yeah, Terry Hughes, CU Denver. I'm going to ask you to put your org psych hat back on for a minute. You had quite a bit of spread on that first chart.
Yep.
Lots of people off to the right. Aside from the flexible work options, can you speculate on what those outliers to the right are doing differently than the outliers to the left?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for us, that's where we want to go in terms of finding out, because when you, this is without getting too much into the weeds, the variability, this is age, right? So the net is 0, but there is variability, which means that to us, there are circumstances where age can be a positive impact in and of itself, right? Not accounting for the tenure factor, just for the general experience that comes with age. But we need to discover what those are, right? Same thing for tenure. Tenure can be wildly positive in some, like the bottom right, relative left. We think differences in industry can matter, right? We think differences in the nature of the work being performed can matter, and maybe a couple other conditionals. But we would probably bet on, on industry and on nature of the work as the two sources of that variability. Two big sources, yeah.
A question. So does the changing the workplace, most of us are working now from home, remote. Yep. Did you find any correlation or effect on the value of tenure? And since we're not having many, perhaps face-to-face interactions with our counter employees, did you find anything there?
Yeah, so all these data are pre-COVID, right? So you won't see it in this particular paper, but I can say from other work we've done is that for the most part, working remotely pre-COVID was a liability, right? Your career gets stalled. You don't get promoted at the same rates as your peers who are on site, right? You don't get the same benefits, if you will, et cetera. Now, COVID may change that, right? Because now all of a sudden everybody, or lots of people were working and continue to work remotely. So we're not quite sure how good a guide our past research would be on the future, but I think it's probably still true that there's an element of the value of face-to-face for careers, right? Your own personal career advancement, and I would bet for business results too eventually, right? We all have experiences, and I'm working with people who I've never met. I can't stand it, right? Because we hire them, they work remotely. We hire them during COVID. We form teams, right, to work with a client organization in our enterprise. And I don't think it's sustainable for a long time until we get some face-to-face stuff. But that's just totally impressionistic. Yeah.
Rick, we have a question from the audience in the live stream. And one of them is, did you test for tenure in the position or the unit versus tenure overall at the organization?
Great question. So in many of the individual studies, the time and position or tenure and position is indeed accounted for. It was not accounted for in 100%, but I would tell you 80% of them. The problem with the sort of tenure in the unit is the unit keeps changing, right? Because in a hospital, stick with that one example, you may have a different set of people on the floor because they're working different shifts, because some might go on vacation, et cetera. So it's not like it's not like the same cockpit crew in the airplane is at the end of the flight that started at the beginning of the flight. The composition changes during the regular coursework. So time and job, yes, a tenure and job, but not tenure in the social, if you will, group.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more. We're running out of time, but I like this question. I like all questions, but this person asked, how important is tenure versus getting fresh eyes and getting a new perspective in an organization? And I don't know if you were able to account for that, but I thought it was worthwhile to bring up.
Right. It's a great question. I don't think we can answer it. I think what we with our data, clearly, the notion of gaining experience in different places is part of what brings the potential value of the, quote, general human capital, right? That as we age, we can work in different places. And what we see is, what we would hypothesize or theorize is, for example, the value of my general human capital that I brought to Mercer got magnified, right, and was released, if you will, by the accumulation of my firm-specific time, right? That knowing the Mercer way enabled me to take advantage of all that stuff I knew, right, around research and data and business organizations, et cetera. So the notion there is that the general experience matters a lot, but it matters and gets expressed through the accumulation of time with the current employer. Thank you very much.